Welcome back to Discipleship Journey with DJ. In episode 9, we talked about multiplication, about living as spiritual rivers rather than reservoirs. But rivers have direction, they are moving somewhere. They don't just flow, they arrive. And discipleship isn't just about starting well, it's about finishing well. Because think about it, a river that dries up before reaching its destination never fulfills its purpose. There's something powerful when you think about the finish line. Starting is exciting, growth is rewarding, multiplication is meaningful, but finishing is eternal. Now, the Apostle Paul, near the end of his life, wrote these words to young Timothy in Second Timothy chapter 4 and verses 6 and 7. He said, "For I am already being poured out as a drink offering, and the time of my departure is at hand. I have fought the good fight, I have finished the race, I have kept the faith." I want you to notice what he celebrates. Not comfort, not applause, not popularity. He celebrates faithfulness to the end. And the fact is, many start strong, fewer finish faithful. And with that thought and that imagery in our minds of running a race, imagine two runners in a marathon where you have one who burst off the starting line with incredible speed. The crowd cheers. He looks unstoppable. But by mile 5, he's winded. By mile 10, he's slowing. By mile 15, he's walking. And eventually, he steps off the course. But yet, another runner begins steady. No spotlight, no flash, just rhythm, just pace, just consistent steps. And hours later, when the crowd has thinned and the sun is lower, that steady runner crosses the finish line. Friends, the Christian life is not a sprint fueled by emotion. It is a marathon fueled by conviction. There's a Hebrew writer who tells us in Hebrews chapter 12 to run with endurance the race set before us. Notice what he says: run with endurance, not sprint, not compete, not impress. A key word is endure. So, true, emotion may start your race, but conviction is ultimately what finishes it. And this is where we go back to a lot of times the topic of the danger of spiritual drift over time. Because again, no one plans to fall away. It rarely happens in one dramatic moment, but rather it happens gradually. Small compromises, quiet discouragement, unresolved bitterness, unchecked fatigue, drift, that's subtle, where my mind many times thinks about a boat that's untied from the dock. There's no explosion, there's no storm, no dramatic decision. It's just slow movement. At first, it's barely noticeable. A few inches, then a few feet, then out into open water. See, drift doesn't require rebellion, it requires neglect. And that's why finishing well requires intentional endurance. Friends, you don't have to choose rebellion to lose your way. You only have to stop anchoring. Well, let me mention what finishing well is not. Finishing well is not never struggling, never doubting, never falling. It's not perfection, friends, it's persistence. And I thought about, a child who's learning to walk. The fact is Yes, they fall repeatedly, but what makes them walkers is not flawless balance, it's refusal to stay down. And that's it with finishing well. Finishing well isn't about never stumbling. It's about never quitting. And we need to have that long view of faith. Think with me from Ecclesiastes chapter 7 and verse 8. The Ecclesiastes writer says, better is the end of a thing than its beginning. The world celebrates beginnings, but God honors endurance. And the fact is, anyone can be passionate for a season, but discipleship is measured over decades. Again, I like to use imagery and illustrations, as you well know, if you've been following along in this series. And my mind goes to that massive oak tree. It didn't grow strong in one sunny season, did it? It survived storms, high winds, dry summers, harsh winters. Its roots grew deeper because of resistance. Meanwhile, a greenhouse plant that has never faced harsh weather may certainly look beautiful until the first storm snaps it. Roots determine endurance more than branches. Faith that lasts through loss, through prayers that seem unanswered, through disappointments, through change, through aging, through hardship and difficulties, that is powerful. And that's the very thought that Paul brings us from that of Timothy to Timothy. That Paul didn't just finish the race. He says, I have kept the faith. That phrase implies guarding, protecting, holding tightly. There are many things that try to steal faith. It can be cultural pressure, it can be intellectual doubt, suffering, busyness, success. Yes, even success can weaken our dependence on God. And again, think about that relay race. Even a relay race where each runner is carrying the baton. How do they carry it? They carry it carefully because it's not enough to simply run fast. You must not drop what you've been entrusted with. You receive the baton of faith from someone before you. You are now carrying it. You don't accidentally finish well. You choose daily to stay faithful. And you learned and you grew all through those times and those great examples and influence of those before us. But really, ultimately, our eyes are not on people, although, again, influences certainly great, the encouragement that we receive, but our eyes are to be fixated on Jesus. That finish line that is before us. Hebrews tells us to look to Jesus. Just as Paul even told the Corinthian brethren, he said, imitate me even as I also imitate Christ in 1 Corinthians 11 and verse 1. Well, the Hebrew writer talks about Jesus, who were to look, keep our eyes fixated, fixed on him. And it talks about, the Hebrew writer talks about Jesus who endured the cross for the joy set before him. Think about that. Jesus saw beyond the pain. And here you have this one that's climbing a steep mountain trail. Imagine that. The air gets thinner, the path gets harder, the legs begin to ache, and you question whether it's worth it. But then you remember the summit view. Perspective fuels endurance. If this life is all there is, endurance feels foolish. But if eternity is real, and we know that it is, as we see quite evident from the scriptures, then endurance certainly makes sense. And friends, when eternity is clear, endurance becomes possible. Let's take a pause here. And let me ask you, if your life ended today, could you have said the same words as the Apostle Paul? I have kept the faith. Can you say that you have kept it faithfully? If not, today is the day to reset, because finishing well doesn't start at the end of life. It starts today. It starts with your prayers, your acts of obedience, your decision to re anchor even. Consider again what Paul said, and I'm going to add on verse 8 now, 2 Timothy chapter 4. In verses 7 and 8 now, 2 Timothy 4 says, I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Finally, there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give to me on that day. And not to me only, but also to all who have loved his appearing. Even in Matthew 24 and verse 13, he who endures to the end shall be saved. Friends, a life of discipleship is not measured by how loudly it begins, but by how faithfully it ends. So we need to reflect. Ask these questions. What habits do I have today that will certainly be a determining factor in how I finish later? Where am I vulnerable to drift? Am I running with endurance or just enthusiasm? What would finishing well look like for my family and legacy? And if Paul wrote about my faith, what would he say? Thank you for taking the time to be a part of Discipleship Journey with DJ. To be able to make it to episode 10, I certainly do appreciate the encouragement and the time that you have endeavored through each one of these episodes that we've been building on this discipleship journey. And I want to invite you again into the conversation. As I have stated in the previous episodes, if this episode or any of the prior episodes have stirred a question, a thought, or even a struggle in your walk of faith, I'd love to hear from you. You can email your Bible questions, your comments, or reflections anytime to discipleshipjourneywithdj@gmail.com. Again, that's discipleshipjourneywithdj@gmail.com. Let's keep growing together on this discipleship journey. And remember, don't just hear the word, live it. Stay faithful, stay growing, and I'll see you next time as we continue the journey together.